Fokke, partner at 17CAPITAL, a NAV financing firm. It feels to me like NAV finance is a super hot topic right now. You know, this place is packed at IPEM. Everybody's kind of talking about NAV finance. Before we get into why, tell me a little bit about how 17CAPITAL sees NAV finance. You know, what is NAV finance in your mind? What sort of makes you stand out as a sort of market leader in this space?
Very good question, because there are quite actually a few aspects around NAV financing, and it ranges almost from capital call lines to hybrids all the way down to prefs. What we're doing at 17CAPITAL is we're focusing on three areas. It means providing financing either for buyout funds, so solely for buyouts at the fund level in terms of 5, 10, 15, perhaps 20% LTV. Then we finance teams managing those funds, typically for them to invest more into GP commitments, perhaps in terms of M&A, strategic M&A for the management company. And then the third leg of what we do is work with limited partners, accelerating liquidity or bridging exposures on either one or a basket of limited partnership commitments to buyout funds. That's what we do at 17CAPITAL. We have two different products for that. We have a more flexible product, which comes out of our strategic lending fund. Here we can invest without any repayment dates, without any security, but very much with priority over the cash flows as and when they arise. On the other hand, we have, and this is really probably where your question is coming from, like what's really on vogue and what people are talking about is really kind of the financing at the fund level. We do that with our credit fund. It comes in loan format with a repayment date, with some sort of security, with some leakages, and it's more all around a real kind of credit loan product than what we're doing with our strategic lending fund.
Yeah, now I know a little bit about 17CAPITAL, so I know you've been around for a very long time. You've done a lot of deals and transactions. You know, there's a level of legacy and experience that's probably quite hard for anyone else in the market to rival. So you're a very good person to be speaking to. But what is it about the sort of drivers of the market right now that is attractive for people to come out and seek a NAV financing solution?
Yeah. We've been doing it for more than 15 years. And this is the only thing we do at 17CAPITAL. We do nothing else. We have close to 90 people. We've done close to 100 transactions in just doing NAV financing. And what we're seeing today is frankly not that different as what we've seen in the last 15 years. What is perhaps a little bit different, and that's really, I think, a sign of the last 12 to 18 months, is that we haven't seen any liquidity in the market, or very limited liquidity. So buyout funds are not making exits. That means that limited partners are not receiving any distributions. It means that general partners, the teams, the management companies, not receive any distributions. And it means that the funds are not creating recallable distributions. And we are working with the general partners or with the limited partners to create that liquidity, to typically invest more in the existing portfolios. There's some misconception. I'd be very happy to delve into all of that, but most of our capital that we provide is really used to invest more in the exact same portfolio as that we're financing, rather than providing financing to do new deals in new vehicles or those kind of situations.
Yeah. Well, it seems to me actually that if anything, NAV finance has now become mainstream. It's very well used by the top 20, 30, 40 GP managers in the world, really. But just again on 17CAPITAL, I noticed, you recently signed an agreement with Oaktree.
Yeah.
Does that mean?
Very happy with that.
Which is a great agreement. Does it mean you're kind of going global now with this? A greater expansion into the US. What's the rationale behind that?
Yeah, we've always invested globally. In our Fund 1, we've done an investment in the US. We opened a New York office in 2016, globally being predominantly Europe and the US. What we've sought with the Oaktree partnership is really getting a bit more brand recognition on the sourcing for our new transactions in the United States. We know the European market quite well. We've been doing, and Robert, one of the three managing partners, has led the US expansion, has done extremely good job. But there's so many GPs, we might know most of them, but definitely they don't know 17 Capital. On the contrary, they all know Howard Marks. So that's been very much for us, kind of that team up to get that almost foot in the door, create the dialogue, and ultimately capture more of the opportunity that the US market offers to 17 Capital. Now, importantly to say, and this was also something that attracted us a lot to Oaktree, is Oaktree said, look, we would like to partner with you, we would like to buy a stake in you, but what we can offer you is the same as that Brookfield offered to us. So Brookfield owns a majority stake in Oaktree, but Oaktree operates very independently from Brookfield, save for a couple of specific areas where they collaborate very effectively. And that's exactly what we're doing with Oaktree. So they bought a small majority stake, they leave us alone, we're separate offices, we're separate teams, they're not gonna have magic fundraising machines for us, we do our own work, but there's specific topics, particularly on the sourcing and helping GPs across the capital structures at the fund level with the Oaktree direct lending platform to provide more services to those general partners.
Fokke, you talked to me a little bit there about your partnership with Oaktree and what that means around growth and expansion. If I could just take it back to the outlook for the market level again, what's your view on the direction of travel for NAV finance? Are we going to see more of it? It feels to me that it's just going to grow as alternatives generally grows. But what's the more nuanced reflections on the outlook?
Largely what you're saying, if the market on alternatives is growing, that means that there's more net asset value. So even if you finance the same amount of that market, the market is growing, the NAV financing market should be growing as well. I think what we are observing is something even more interesting, certainly for the NAV market as a whole, or the NAV financing market as a whole. When we started financing in 2012, we were investing from funds that were 200-300 million. We were talking to the top 5 sponsors globally, the KKRs, the Blackstones, the Carlyles, all those kind of large groups. Although they had an interest for these kind of solutions, we didn't have the capacity to really service that interest. So that has really changed right now. And I think there's more capacity from the NAV lender side. We certainly have significantly larger funds, can underwrite significant facilities. Because if you think about it, if you're talking about a fund that is 10, 15, perhaps 20 billion of net asset value, and it's looking for a 5, 10, perhaps even 15% loan to value loan, then we're talking about facilities that are 2, 3, or perhaps even $4 billion in size. And that needs to come from somewhere. And that's really what is, I think, driving at the moment some of that interest from the larger end of the industry, because that capacity is starting to be generated from investors. And that is driving, I think, some of the narrative as well in the media and in some of the articles that we're reading at the moment.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, actually. Obviously, as someone that works with the media every day, there is a narrative developing and emerging around NAV finance. But tell me how you perceive and deal with risk. What do you start with? Where does everything start when you're looking at an opportunity? What's number 1, 2, and 3 most important things?
It's very simple. Manager, portfolio, structure, and in that order. So we look to invest with managers that are institutionalized, that have a capacity to raise future funds. I think everything comes together in that capacity, because that really talks about the general partner, limited partner relationship, whether they continue to support them. It thinks about key man risk, all those kind of things from a manager come into place. Secondly, we look for well-performing portfolios, well-diversified, that we can finance that probably have delevered a little bit, de-risked. So you're not increasing the risk of the portfolio. You might re-risk it a little bit, but generally speaking, the portfolios we finance have de-risked quite substantially. And it's only in a third stage that we look at structure, right? So structure when it comes to loan to values or repayment dates, there's no low risk structure for a bad portfolio or for an underperforming manager. And I think this is something that I briefly touched upon at the beginning. The rationale for a transaction is vital for us as lenders. So each time we invest, all stakeholders need to benefit from it. Who are the stakeholders, or some of the stakeholders? It starts with the limited partner of the fund, then the general partner, the NAV lender, and other stakeholders that we find around and that are impacted by these NAV lending facilities. And that's also why it's so vital, because our capital needs to create more value for those stakeholders and keep the existing GP-LP alignment intact without changing.
Can you give me an example then of perhaps how it's helped when there was a problem?
Absolutely. So we worked during COVID with a number of managers that, like all managers, faced issues in the portfolios. One example, there was a manager had a fund, an older vintage fund, 5 assets left, was fully called, no capital available at the fund anymore. 4 of the companies were doing very well. 1 was really struggling with the COVID impact. What we did is we provided a NAV facility at the fund level. Our capital was used to make an equity injection in the company to fully stabilize the environment and the problems, frankly, that they were facing. Now, that saved the company from administration. It saved the lenders in the company from a pre-pack. It saved all the employees from some hairy restructurings. And we're actually quite proud of what we've done there, supporting a well-performing fund with 5 assets. 4 of them were doing very well. 1 was having an issue, and we provided that additional capital to save it. And the manager was able to sell the company a couple of months or years later in a very orderly fashion, creating or saving the value for its limited partners, saving those jobs, and also repaying the lenders in full for the investment.
Well, Fokke, I think we're going to hear a lot more about NAV finance in the months to come, but you've painted a great picture for us. Thanks so much for joining.
Thanks, Sam.